Hey everybody, it's Alfred Parsar Jr. back with another edition of the Metropolitan Report. And before today's report begins, just want to remind everybody to go down below, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be one of the first ones notified when a new video hits the channel, whether it's a full Metropolitan Report or one of our report shorts. So thank everybody for the continued support, and it means a lot to me. And once again, please feel free to share this podcast to any Mets fans you know, baseball fans, sports podcast fans, anybody. Uh, Share the podcast, and if you have an opinion on something that's said, not said, you disagree with, agree with, something I may have overlooked, go down below to the comment section, let your voice be heard, and I'll be sure to respond back to you. So once again, thank you for supporting the Metropolitan Report. But folks, let's get right into it. All-Star break is over. The New York Mets sit in second place in the National League East. The New York Mets finished the first half with a series win over the Kansas City Royals. Can't ask for much more than that, finishing the first half on a high note. The New York Mets entering today, by the way, Thursday, July 17th, 2025. The New York Mets sit with a record of 55-42, only a half game back of the Philadelphia Phillies, who are 55-41 in the National League East. And this, a lot of people will tell you in baseball, is when the real season starts. Of course, it's the second half. Trade deadline is about 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away from today, the trade deadline. Over the weekend, we'll have our trade deadline special, where we're going to discuss who the Mets should target and who's going to be available in this, that, and a third. Of course, again, July 31st is the trade deadline. But this Mets team ended the first half getting healthy. Kodai Senga is back. Sean Manaea is back. So this rotation, which was depleted, I am so surprised with the horrible June that the Mets had, that the rotation no longer in shambles. Well, it was in shambles and they were able to hold on, but it's no longer in shambles. We'll talk about that in a bit. But first, um, let's recap the Mets All-Star festivities. They dropped a series to the Baltimore Orioles, won the first game, lost the last two before winning a series against the Royals. And then the All-Star break came upon us. But the New York Mets, first half, I'm going to have to, give some evaluations. Here's my analysis of the Mets' first half. The offense, not so great. Of course, 1 through 3, the big three, as I like to call them, the Lindor, Soto, Alonso. Couldn't ask for much more out of those three. I've beaten the subject to death with Lindor, Soto, and Alonso. Those three, the consistent three, the thumpers, if you will, of the Mets offense. What more? What more can I say? It was the bottom half of the order. I would primarily 5 through 9 that did not produce. Hitting in those slots all year long: Tyrone Taylor, Ronnie Mauricio, Luis Anel Acuna, Francisco Alvarez, Luis Torrens, Hayden Sanger, uh, you know, Jeff McNeil from time to time, but McNeil's he got consistent as June went on. But that Mets offense in the bottom half was no good. If I'm the Mets, I gotta go and try to get another bat. Brandon Nimmo has had flashes of being a great player. Brandon Nimmo tied for the MLB league lead in Grand Slams. 2 Grand Slams in a week prior to the All-Star break. But I don't know. I'm the Mets in the bottom half. They need somebody with some oomph. Not even in the bottom half. You get a fourth hitter. The Mets, they have enough capital in the farm system, or enough good young players to go ahead and make a move for a slugger. There's going to be a lot of sluggers on the market this trade deadline. A Luis Robert, a Ryan O'Hearn, somebody. And This Mets team would heavily benefit from getting another bat. Again, very inconsistent. The Tyrone Taylors, the Luis Angel Acuñas, the Ronnie Mauricios, whoever the catcher is between Alvarez, Senger, and Torrens. There's no consistent threat in the bottom of that lineup. Again, Soto, Lindor, Alonso, great. Nimmo here and there has flashes of greatness. Starling Marte, to everybody's surprise, after they tried to trade him in the offseason and let it be known, Marte uh, actually had a good first half. Starling Marte, I was I'm very surprised because Marte, he's been injured a lot the last couple of years. He's currently injured now. And, Starling Marte, aging veteran, and he had as good of a first half as anybody could have expected. Starling Marte, 163 at bats. He's batting 270. I'm very surprised, especially with his start to the season. I'm gonna look at Starling Marte's numbers. Big surprise here. I mean, March, the Mets only played 3 games. He had 7 at bats in those 3 games. He hit 286 in March. He hit 156 in April. 300 in May. 291 in June, and before he got hurt in July, was hitting 438. Starling Marte, again, a guy, he was an all-star with the Mets in 2022, the year that they won 101 games under Buck Showalter. But Starling Marte has surprisingly been a good bench guy for the Mets. Of course, he's platoon DH throughout the season with Jesse Winker, Ronnie Mauricio here and there. Lindor has taken a game at DH this season, but Jared Young has had reps at a designated hitter this season. But Marte, I could not have asked for a better man to sporadically appear in the lineup than Starling Marte. Of course, Marte, nowhere near what he used to be as far as the everyday outfielder, the stud. I mean, but the guy's got a lifetime 285 batting average. A seasoned veteran in Marte, and a guy who's had quite a bit of success in his career. Of course, the former Pittsburgh Pirate, Miami Marlin, Arizona Diamondback, and an Athletic. Starling Marte. He may not be in his prime anymore, but I'll take a guy any day who's batting 270 on the season. So Starling Marte in that lineup has been all right. Again, Jeff McNeil, another guy. He's had his ups and downs this season, but Jeff McNeil, so far this season, batting 253. And in today's game, 250 is the equivalent to 300 back in the day. So I'll take it. But everybody else, like I said, that 6 through 9, the Tyrone Taylors, the whoever's in the catcher slot between Torrens, Senger, and Alvarez, if he ever comes back up. Luis Angel Acuña, he's great defense and great speed, but at the plate, my God. So a lot remains to be desired in the bottom half of the order. I think the Mets will benefit from another bat. Offense-wise, I'm going to give it a C+. Because in order to win games, you still have to be able to score runs. And although the top of the order is top heavy and they produce, I got to knock them significantly because that bottom of the order is atrocious. They don't turn the lineup over. C+ for the Mets offense. Mets pitching from March all the way to the beginning of June was solid. Best bullpen, best rotation in the National League and MLB. Their starting rotation for much of the first half of the season led MLB. It was in the 2s. Then the injuries started to pile up. Kodai Senga went down, and that was the first blow. He has now since been back. Griffin Canning lost for the season with the torn Achilles. And then injuries to spot starter Paul Blackburn. He's been out since. At one point, the only reliable arms in the bullpen were Clay Holmes and David Peterson. David Peterson, who, by the way, ended up being a replacement all-star. Kudos to him. He's having a great season. But this Mets pitching staff was able to, well, I shouldn't say the pitching staff because the offense, again, you can't win games without scoring runs, but the offense was able to carry them when the pitching was bad. Um, it's a bad sign when you have so many injuries that you have to sub in guys like Blade Tidwell for a spot start, going with bullpen games, uh, throwing Justin Hagenman out there in a Subway Series. Thank God you won that game. But the Mets pitching staff, both the rotation and the bullpen, have been depleted for the last month and a half. Uh, Guys going down left and right. AJ Minter, Danny Young, Dedniel Nunez, and we'll talk about these guys later on when we get to the injury report. But a lot of these guys, when you lose a good chunk of guys who were in spring training and have to go on the free agent market or the waiver wire and get guys who have ERAs north of 15 with other teams like Zach Pop, or guys who miserably failed in their stint with another team earlier this year, like a Jose Castillo, or you got to go and get a journeyman because it's too early to make a trade, like a Richard Lovelady. Your only reliable arm cannot be your closer. And yes, I know everybody's due for regression. And as bad as Huascar Brazaban was in June, and Reed Garrett unraveled in June, um, you got to have more reliable arms in the bullpen. It's like Edwin Diaz has been the only constant all year. Mets pitching for the most part, because we're only basing on the first half, and there was more to the first half outside of the month of June. And there were a lot of games where sometimes the pitching was good and the offense just didn't deliver. But I'm going to go ahead and give the pitching a B. Again, nobody can foresee injuries. Nobody expected three Mets relievers to go down in the first half with season-ending injuries. Nobody expected Griffin Canning, who had no business being as good as he was this season, um, to have a season-ending injury. Griffin Canning has been bad all of his professional big league career. So the fact that he had a 7-3, 3 point whatever it was ERA, a shock to us all. And I think if Griffin Canning would have remained healthy this season, he probably would have been he probably would have played himself to a big contract next season, if not with the Mets, some multi-year deal somewhere else. It's a shame the man was only on a 1 year this year. But nonetheless, this Mets team, they need to, aside from needing a bat at the deadline, they have to address at least the bullpen. Now with Manaya and Senga back healthy, I see the rotation being Senga, Manaya, Holmes, and Peterson. And then you could get the spot starter of maybe Hagenman. I doubt Tidwell's going to see opportunities now that there's more health in the bullpen. But the Mets rotation looking very healthy, or healthier than it was to begin the season. Let's talk All-Star festivities. So the Mets sent 4 All-Stars to the Midsummer Classic in Atlanta. Francisco Lindor, his first All-Star game as a Met, which he's been a Met since 2021, and this is now his first All-Star game. The man was second in MVP voting last season, and he didn't get any All-Star game, but whatever. Pete Alonso, who has basically lived in the All-Star festivities since he's been a Met. He's been an All-Star in every season he's ever played in -1. Edwin Diaz, no shocker there, one of the best closers in all of baseball, only one blown save all year, ERA under a little over 1. And then the surprise, because Robbie Ray of the San Francisco Giants had pitched over the weekend. Of course, the All-Star game itself is on a Tuesday. The last games played were on the previous Sunday. He pitched over the weekend. He didn't want to mess up his pitching schedule, so he bowed out of the All-Star game, which paved the way for an injury replacement, and David Peterson was selected to replace Robbie Ray. Of course, David Peterson, a 6-4 record, 3.06 ERA. So David Peterson with his first All-Star game appearance. And again, David Peterson has struck out 93 in 109 innings. Well deserved by David Peterson, 6-4 record again. But as far as how the Mets performed in the All-Star game, Francisco Lindor only had one at bat. Did not get a hit. Pete Alonso, the big 3-run homer, which put the National League at that time up over the American League 6-0. The American League ended up coming back. The American League ended up tying the game. They had to go to a swing off, which is like a mini home run derby. At the end of the game, National League ended up winning. Thank you, Kyle Schwarber. Never thought I would thank a Philly for anything in my life, but here we are. As far as Mets pitching, Edwin Diaz pitched 2/3 of an inning, did not give up a run, walked one, struck out one. David Peterson had a scoreless frame. So Mets pitching flawless in the Midsummer Classic. Lindor, a little to be desired. And Pete Alonso, the first home run in the All-Star game since David Wright hit a home run in the 2006 All-Star game. That was a blast by the captain back then. So yeah, Mets almost 19 years since a Met hit a home run in an All-Star game, but Pete Alonso did it. That was his first homer in the All-Star game. Not worth it to talk about the home run derby. Cal Raleigh did win it. There was no Mets participation in the derby, so we're not going to talk about that. The All-Star Futures game. Ladies and gentlemen, had a couple of Mets in the game. The All-Star Futures game here. Couple of Met prospects participated. Jonah Tong, who has been killing it in Double-A Binghamton. He is the Mets' number 2 prospect, overall MLB number 59 prospect. He is the minor league strikeout leader this season, and he appeared in the game in the top of the second inning, and he had a 1-2-3 inning. He struck out one in his one inning of work. Of course, for those of you who don't know, Jonah Tong, 125 strikeouts in 78 2/3 innings for Double-A Binghamton this season. So Tong looking really good. Had an impressive showing in the All-Star Futures game Sunday afternoon. The other Met prospect who played in the All-Star Futures game, Carson Bench. Bench played left field in the 5th inning. One at bat, flew out to left. At least he didn't strike out. Again, these All-Star games, you can't really judge much, whether it's the All-Star game itself or the Futures game, because most of these guys, the rosters are so loaded, and every team's got to have a representative, or in the case of the Futures game, every organization needs a representative. So these guys are even lucky if they get one at bat. But Jonah Tong, going up against the minors' best, and again, the Futures game is interesting because they tend to mix levels. Carson Bench, of course, right now he's in Single-A Brooklyn. Jonah Tong, Double-A Binghamton. But the Futures game, you get guys in Single-A, you get a couple of guys in Double-A, and there's a little sprinkle of guys in Triple-A in there. There was at one point former Met prospect Jared Kelenic, after he was already on the Mariners and had big league experience, was still in that year's Futures game after he got demoted to start the season when he had a cup of coffee his first year in Seattle. So he was in the Futures game after already having major league at bats. But really impressed with Jonah Tong this season. Carson Bench, of course, he is the Mets' number 3 rated prospect, overall MLB number 74. And again, the future looks bright for this Mets team. Many Mets of the past have showed out in the Futures game. Pete Alonso hit a towering home run when he was in the Futures game about 8 years ago. Who could forget in Coors Field in 2021, or 22 rather, whichever one was in Coors Field. Francisco, no, it was 2021, sorry, when Francisco Alvarez hit a moonshot to the second deck in center field and, well, right center field in Coors Field. So Mets historically have shown out in the All-Star Futures game. But, again, neither here nor there. All right, so we're going to get into... also, before we get into some transaction and injury news, the MLB draft was also a part of All-Star Weekend, and the Mets made their selection. The Mets have drafted and now have signed infielder Mitch Voit. Voit, of course, an infielder from the University of Michigan, selected with the 38th overall pick in the 2025 MLB draft. He will be available to the media tomorrow before the Mets take on the Cincinnati Reds at Citi Field. Again, he is the Mets' first-round draft pick this year. He's going to begin his career in rookie ball at Port St. Lucie. And again, Mitch Voit, 3 seasons at the University of Michigan. This season was his junior season. Started 56 games at second base, hitting .346. This season, he had 14 home runs, 40 walks, 14 steals, a slugging percentage of .668, OPS of 1.139. In his career at the University of Michigan, he hit .303, 127 runs scored, 46 doubles, 7 triples, 35 home runs, 138 RBI, and 19 steals in 169 career games. So, also, Voit was voted the Wisconsin Gatorade Baseball Player of the Year in 2022. So, Mitch Voit, third baseman. Mets kind of preparing for the future. I say preparing for the future because you got a young guy in Mark Vientos whose defense has not been great. Starling Marte, who's been DHing, aging now. I'd be surprised if he's even on the team past the trade deadline this year. Mitch Voit, solid defensively from the tape that I've seen of him. Again, college baseball a bit different than Major League Baseball, or professional baseball, I should say. College baseball using aluminum bats, so there's more pop off the bat. But if you can field consistently in college baseball, where the exit velocities are higher, then I think it should translate to the MLB game. I think Mitch Voit, this is a telltale sign that because third base, and let's not lie, third base since David Wright retired has been a struggle to fill. Todd Frazier did it for 2.5 seasons. I say that because 2018, 2019, and then he started 2020 with the Rangers, came back at the end of 2020. And then it's just been a who's who, a carousel of rotating folks. Brett Beatty, Eduardo Escobar at one point, Mark Vientos. I think the Mets here are trying to say that they've, at least as they think, have found the third baseman of the future. And again, you heard his college numbers. Oh, the lifetime OPS in college of 1.139. Again, aluminum bat. But one thing you cannot coach and teach is raw power, ability to make contact. So we'll see how Mitch Voit does. As is with most typical top first round draft picks, he'll begin playing in the Mets minor league system before this MLB season is over. So he'll get a cup of coffee in the minors this year. And we've seen guys like, well, granted they're pitchers, but Paul Skeens was the number 1 overall draft pick in 2023. Made his debut in 24. Brewers' Jacob Mizorowski, say what you want about that kid getting an all-star selection, but Mizorowski, drafted in 24, makes his debut in 25, and 5 starts later, he's an all-star, which I heavily disagree with, but this is not a Brewers podcast, so I'm not going to get into it. But Mitch Voit, Solid. I think it's a solid pick in the MLB draft. All right, moving on. Mets transactions and injury update. We'll start off in the bullpen with Jose Butto. Butto, who had an undisclosed illness, ladies and gentlemen, was put on the IL on July 4th, right before the Mets played the Yankees. Put on the 15-day injured list, and they retroactivated his injury list assignment back to July 1st. He is expected back tomorrow, so he'll be back on the roster. Expected back after the All-Star break. The illness was not considered to be serious. Butto did pitch in the minors on July 15th in a small rehab assignment, so he'll be back tomorrow. Max Kranick will be back Saturday. He was on the 15-day injured list, retroactive to June 16th. Actually, no, he won't be back tomorrow. He'll be back to be determined. I apologize. He began experiencing elbow discomfort on June 15th. An MRI revealed a flexor strain, and it is said reportedly that Kranick is exploring options, including Tommy John surgery. If Kranick gets Tommy John, we could kiss him goodbye until 2027, because he ain't coming back from that. At least not quickly. And then, of course, when you come back from a year of no pitching, the rehabilitation for that is going to be very lengthy. Speaking of folks who underwent Tommy John, Dead Neil Nunez, the latest Mets bullpen piece to be done for the year. Dead Neil Nunez out for the rest of the season. He underwent Tommy John surgery, elbow discomfort, right elbow sprain. The sprain had to be that bad. Usually sprains are not that bad, but he must have sprained that elbow really bad to have undergone Tommy John. He is the third Mets bullpen pitcher to get Tommy John this season, following A.J. Minter and Danny Young. Man, this bullpen at the start of next season is gonna be depleted, folks. But yeah, Dead Neil Nunez, bye-bye, so long, farewell. We'll see him next year. Again, the third Mets bullpen piece to go undergo Tommy John. Dead Neil Nunez, for what it's worth, only pitched in 9 2/3 innings this season. Struck out 11 at an ERA of 4.66 with no win-loss record. And then Jesse Winker, who just came back for that series against the Baltimore Orioles and Kansas City Royals. He was placed on the 10-day injured list on July 11th. No timetable for his return. Against the Orioles on July 10th, after just one plate appearance, he was pulled from the game. MRI revealed a lower back inflammation. He'll be treated with medication for the next week, and then they'll reevaluate him and see what will happen to him and where he will go. Starling Marte, 10-day injured list, but retroactive to July 7th. He had an MRI. He has right knee soreness. His expected return is before the end of July. And last but not least, Paul Blackburn, who will throw bullpen sessions in Port St. Lucie after the All-Star break. Apparently, well, the All-Star break is ending. Today's the last day. Games resume tomorrow. But he's going to be in Port St. Lucie for the foreseeable future before they determine what to do with him. So the Mets still kind of banged up. That Kranick injury, if Kranick is done for the season, and Kranick, mind you, I lobbied for that kid to make the team out of spring training. And it's just very sad to see a kid who was unhittable and ate up innings in March, in April, in May, had a rough June, gets hurt, and now you hear that Tommy John is a reality. It's It's just sad. The Mets, with the way that their bullpen arms are going down, losing dead Neil Nunez. Um, at some point, David Stearns has got to say to himself, "Listen, I got to get a bullpen arm. I can't just hope that my offense carries me to the ninth inning and then we call in Edwin Diaz. It doesn't work like that." But like I said, we'll talk about trade deadline stuff in the next episode of the report as we grow closer to the trade deadline. Looking at the Mets' upcoming schedule, the Mets going to start a 6-game homestand coming up, starting with a 3-game set against the Cincinnati Reds. The Cincinnati Reds are one of those teams that people expected to finally come over the hump and, do something this season. Right now, they're sitting at 50-47. They probably won't catch the Cubs for that NL Central title, but they have a chance to get a wild card depending on how the next month goes. It's a tight race in the NL Central. The Cubs are first. Brewers 1 game behind them. Cardinals at 51-46, 6.5 behind. And the Reds 50-47 is 7.5. We look at the NL wild card standings here. And the NL wild card standings as of today, I mean, granted, no team has played a game since Sunday, but the Brewers have the first wild card spot. The Mets have the second. Padres have the third. And the Reds are 2.5 back of the last wild card spot. So a lot of time to make things happen. The probable pitching matchups for this series on tomorrow night, Friday. Nick Lodolo takes the bump for the Reds. He's 6-6, 3.38 ERA. The Mets have not announced a starter. On Saturday, Nick Martinez, 6-9, 4.85 ERA. Mets have not announced a starter. And then here's the real test Sunday. Andrew Abbott, who's been a surprise, 8-1, 2.07 ERA. Mets have not announced a starter. And then no starting pitching matchups for either of the 3 games have been announced between the Mets and the Angels. That series starts Monday. The LA Angels, they're sitting at 47-49 on the year. Very rare the Angels make an appearance at Citi Field. The last time they did was 2023. That was Shohei Ohtani's last season as an LA Angel. I was fortunate enough to go to one of those games and see Ohtani in person for the first time, as well as Nolan Shanwell. That kid's going to be a stud if he's not already. But the Mets, it remains to be seen. I can't even make an accurate prediction because I don't know who the starters are. But it's the Cincinnati Reds. I think the Mets can win 2 out of 3 Friday and Saturday. And if the Mets are going to make this chase to win the division, they are going to have to win series. Cannot drop series like the one in Baltimore. Got to beat the teams that have no business beating you. And lastly, folks, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart and many Mets fans' hearts. For those of you who have not been living under a rock, and for those of you who have, I'll tell you anyway. On Saturday, before the game against the Cincinnati Reds, the Mets are going to retire the number of David Wright. David Wright played his entire Major League Baseball career with the Mets. Never played for another organization. The Mets were fortunate enough to have David Wright as their third baseman for 14 seasons, from 2004 to 2018. He missed 1 full year to injury in 2017, but David Wright, one of the all-time greatest Mets to ever play the game. David Wright, personally, is my favorite Met of all time. Among his accolades, 14 big league seasons all with the Mets. Lifetime 296 average, 242 home runs, 970 runs batted in. A 7-time All-Star in 2006, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Again in 2012 and 2013. Won a Gold Glove in 2007 and 2008. And also in the same season that he won each of those Gold Gloves, he won the Silver Slugger Award. Major League debut, July 21st, 2004. Last Major League appearance, September 29th, 2018. A member of the 30-30 Club. David Wright also holds the distinction of being one of only 4 captains in the Mets team history. Of course, the other 3, being John Franco, Gary Carter, and Keith Hernandez. He will join on Saturday Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, Keith Hernandez, Mike Piazza, Gil Hodges, and Casey Stengel as Mets who have had their number retired. Nobody will be able to wear the number 5 for the Mets organization ever again. Of course, how did the Mets find David Wright? When the Mets traded away Mike Hampton, when Mike Hampton went to the Colorado Rockies in 2001, the Mets received a conditional draft pick for his departure. They used that conditional draft pick to get David Wright. So, David Wright, if injuries did not rob him of greatness, David Wright arguably could have had a longer career, more than 14 years. And who knows, maybe he could have been... He won't get into Cooperstown because, he just doesn't have the numbers to do it. But as far as all-time Mets greats, can't say anything more. David Wright, I'll never forget, I was at Game 3 of the 2015 World Series. The Mets ultimately lost that series 4-1 to the Kansas City Royals. But David Wright, in the one game that they won, hit a towering home run. I'll never forget it. I was in section 537. And for anybody who has been in Citi Field, 537. And actually, it's ironic that game was the last time I ever sat in the 500s. But it's the World Series. Who's not going to go to the World Series? But I'll never forget that home run. David Wright was, and I'm sorry to talk about the man like he's deceased. He's still alive. David Wright was the right guy, pardon the pun or the play on words, that you'd want to have as the face of your organization. David Wright was a professional, always took accountability, solid leadership, never afraid to speak to the media. And you look at the times that David Wright was on this team, 2004 to 2018. In that time frame, the Mets only made the postseason 3 times in his time as a player. 2006, 2015, and 2016. David Wright, his teams didn't see the postseason anywhere near regularly. And he took that scrutiny that came with being the best player on a bad team in a bad organization for a long time. Never badmouthed the organization, never went out in the public and did anything that would make people look at him funny, never embarrassed the organization. Granted, during the Wilpon era, when the Wilpons owned the team, they embarrassed themselves quite enough. But David Wright never had any off-field incidents. He was a guy by all accounts. Players in the clubhouse enjoyed. Jose Reyes has always spoken very highly of David Wright, and amongst others. There were plenty of times, especially when Citi Field first opened, I took trips to go watch Mets games before I became a season ticket holder, and David Wright would walk up there to either one of two walk up songs. I Got Five on It by the Loonies or The Right Stuff by the New Kids on the Block, and you know David Wright, one of the all-time Met greats, classy guy. Who can't forget his heroics in the World Baseball Classic where he earned the nickname Captain America. So much so that Marvel signed off on a Funko Pop with David Wright wearing a Mets hat, dressed in the Captain America uniform with the shield. I can't forget the 2013 World Baseball Classic where he hit that grand slam against Italy. Five RBIs against Puerto Rico later on in the tournament in 2013. Led the tournament in RBIs. And it's a shame he sat out against the Dominican Republic. But David Wright in 2013, he made the All-World Baseball Classic team. He was the only American on that team. Even in 2009, that World Baseball Classic against Puerto Rico, David Wright with a walk-off hit. The guy had a lot of clutch moments. And again, you for an organization, now I'm not saying the Mets are the Yankees or, any, say what you want about the Yankees and their prestige, but, David Wright, only the fourth captain in the history of the team. And look who he's in the company with when you talk about Mets captains. Gary Carter is a Hall of Famer, although he's wearing a Montreal Expos hat on his plaque. Keith Hernandez, one of the all-time great defensive first basemen there ever was. Shame he's not in the Hall, former MVP. And John Franco, who for a long time was the Mets closer. And David Wright, he went out there every game, played his heart out, left it all on the field, gave his best effort, 110% every time. He loved the fan base, and the fan base, we loved him back just as much as he loved us. And out of all the players in Mets history who have yet to have their number retired, I can't think of a better player to have his number retired than David Wright. I've been watching Mets baseball since about 1996. And even though Mike Piazza was big when I was a kid, as far as superstars in baseball, and I'm a huge Mike Piazza guy, don't get me wrong. But no Met in the history of Mets had a polarizing effect on me than David Wright. And I would assume I'm not just speaking for myself when I say that. Baseball goes in generations. For the kids of the 90s, and I am a 90s kid, but for the kids of the 90s, Mike Piazza, if you were a kid that was a Mets fan, Mike Piazza was our hero. Mike Piazza was on his way out. He only played a season and a half with David Wright, but when David Wright came up, that generation of kids who became Mets fans, David Wright was their guy. Just like Tom Seaver was their guy when there were kids in the 60s getting into baseball and they decided to be Mets fans. Just like Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden were their guys, and Carter and Hernandez were their guys when those '80s kids decided to get into baseball and be Mets fans. David Wright, generational talent. It's a shame that his body started to betray him later on, but there's nobody left that's more deserving right now than David Wright, and I'm going to attend his number retirement ceremony Saturday. We'll have the footage uploaded here on the channel from the ceremony, and yeah, I'm really happy to see the Cap getting his due, getting his respect, getting his flowers. Going to be inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame and getting his number retired. So thank you for the memories, Cap, and I can't wait to see you in Citi Field on Saturday. I tip my hat to you. Well, folks, that's been another Metropolitan Report. My name is Alfred Parsart Jr. Again, if you like this channel, hit the subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment. I'll see you guys throughout the weekend. Stay tuned for Metropolitan Report shorts to come in the upcoming days, and let's go Mets.